second.
Just waiting for her to share her screen.
Sorry, Amy, I think you need to either make me host again or allow me to share the screen.
Okay.
It's not letting me. It's because I logged out by accident. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no problem. Hold on. Let's see. I'll make you a co-host again. Okay, you're co-host.
Great, thank you, and apologies. And
we are recording this event if anyone wants to watch it again.
And let's see, share. And okay. So just checking, can you see the text? Because I can't, because my faces are in the way. Okay, great. So sorry for all the technical glitching, but I think it'll be okay now, hopefully. I want to say thank you so much to the Westchester Jewish Center and to Amy Kennedy for this opportunity to show my work at the Koslowe Gallery. And I want to thank everyone who Zoomed here this evening. I have been a collage artist for over 20 years, and during that time, my methods have changed and evolved, but my inspiration has not. Collage is an art form that can be exercised in many ways. Bits of paper, photographs, drawings, found objects, organized and attached to a support to create a new work. You may be familiar with some famous collage artists, Robert Rauschenberg, Hannah Hawk, Joseph Cornell, all of whom have influenced me in some way. I begin by painting and drawing on paper and then using the material as the basis for my collage. My idea for a composition may be a word, a color, a feeling, and then the process of layering begins. I spend a lot of time working over and reworking and changing my mind and starting again. Most of my works are two-dimensional, but sometimes they take on a third dimension. What has been consistent is the deeply personal nature of my work and how it reflects me, my feminist self, as well as my traditional life choices, my deep faith and spirituality, as well as my logic and cynicism. The name of this show is Medieval Modern because the highlight is my quarantine series. And when Amy asked and I were talking about it, and she asked me to explain the medieval influence, I was happy to discuss my affection for the Middle Ages, but I realized that maybe not everyone was as enamored of the Metz cloisters as I am. Without turning into a history lesson, I will say that European history, the Middle Ages began in the 5th century and ended in the late 15th century with the Renaissance. Those 10 centuries encompass many unique events, such as the Crusades, famine, plague, war, and significantly, between 1347 and 1350, the Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague. When I began my series, the most topical issues of the day were the growing wealth gaps, xenophobia, anti-intellectualism, rising incidents of anti-Semitism, and of course, a pandemic that required that we cloister and shelter ourselves. You may now see why I sensed a parallel. However, the Middle Ages also represents a time of beautiful arts and crafts, inspired by the spirituality of Christian theology, as well as pagan and mythical beliefs. Illuminated manuscripts, frescoes, stained glass windows, tapestry weaving, to name a few. Here is the famous unicorn tapestry from the galleries at the cloisters, and it shows us a beautiful example of creativity in an uncertain time. So this is my collage, and it's entitled Medieval Monsters. It's eponymous with the show. And when I made it, I hadn't yet conceived that I would be making a series. However, I felt a deep connection with these monsters and their metaphorical meaning. The Ouroboros is a symbol of the eternal cycle, renewal, life, death, and rebirth. I felt assaulted by the virus that seemed to take science by surprise. So I began by exploring the monsters and the demons that characterize the unknown, the evil, the bad luck that could not be explained. Much of medieval art was intended to communicate religion and its stories through images and symbols. I realized that I could approach my series in a storytelling fashion and use the vocabulary of medieval symbols. I began by making small journal-like studies of the months since quarantine. I noticed that there seemed to be a foreshadowing of the things to come. And I wondered, what good is the omen if you can only understand it by looking back? Purim, the holiday of masks, was the last holiday before the quarantine began. It seemed ironic that the holiday of masks should mark the beginning of COVID. There are many other details of the Purim story that connected to my feelings at the time. The Magilla, a long story with a violent ending, Esther's role in pointing out the evil Haman, and chaos that seems to reign. This is a detail of that work. The masking of the heroine's name Hadassah with Esther, the lots of chance, and a very foolish king. In the text of the Parsha Ki Tisa, the first Parsha following Purim, it says, and the Lord struck the people with a plague because they had made the calf. Ki Tisa was the last Shabbat that I attended shul before quarantine began, and twin sisters were being bat mitzvahed. In the midst of quarantine, I found working on this piece to be a joyous and uplifting experience. The girls are holding open the Torah scroll, and I presented the text as an illuminated manuscript. Although the lung-shaped flowers and the dots on the border are foreboding, I loved thinking about these young girls bursting with confidence, intelligence, and beauty. With a nod to the late medieval pre-Renaissance technique of including the patron looking in on the scene, I included an adult onlooker, maybe the artist. I also needed to acknowledge the danger looming in the external world. And while I was creating a cocoon of safety made of faith and family, I thought of the Psalm 27, when evildoers draw near to eat my flesh. The monsters are based on creatures included in many illuminated manuscripts that I studied, and the text is embedded in a checkerboard carpet. I thought that the use of medieval imagery was going to be the unifying visual theme for my series, and it is. But as I looked back at the completed works, I began to see my unconscious focus on hands. Hands protecting, hands accusing, blessing, and inflicting harm. In this second cocoon collage, there is more emphasis on the pleasure of cocooning and less attention on the outside threats. I wanted to express the desire to protect, shelter, and nurture. And these hands help to express those emotions. Until the pandemic, I was unaware of the Black Wedding. As soon as I read about this Eastern European superstition of marrying an unmarriageable couple in a cemetery, as a way of warding off the plague, I knew I had to create this collage. I intentionally presented it with a duality of ideas. Does the chuppah provide protection or not? Is the hand delivering plague or shelter? Is their marriage unique in its significance? Is it a sacrifice or a blessing? I also use the symbolism of medieval and early Renaissance art by giving the couple bare feet, which usually indicates that they are standing on hallowed ground, mourning, or entering a sanctuary. The bride carries the lily, symbolizing her purity, and their hands are held in union, in hope, and in fear. Expressing my feelings about gun violence, police violence, Black Lives Matter, and justice was difficult for me, but I decided the best way would be to present them as a triptych. I continue to rely on the monsters because the idea that we all struggle with demons felt authentic to me. I used the idea of a headstone in the middle to acknowledge the many deaths we have endured. And the last panel is heralded by the tools of science and learning because I wanted to balance the intense emotions of the other two panels with hope and logic. This is the first reading left to right panel. Do not kill, the sixth commandment. Death has been an overwhelming experience of COVID, not only from the disease, but from the violence that has coincided with it. For me, there are a few images more full of despair than the heads of Eve and Adam in Masaccio's expulsion from Eden. And that is where I took my inspiration. These are the hands that hold the guns, and they are guided by our inner demons. These demons represent the monsters inside of us and whether they control us or we control them. This is the middle panel, which I call Justice. Here I admit to a more modern influence. I was looking at Daumier's painting with the clenched fist, and the hand metaphors are here in the fist of anger and the clenched fist holding the scales of justice. This is the top of the headstone. Sorry, that was me. Which is the top of the headstone where spiritual or religious images are traditionally placed. I put the dove representing peace and the light of God. At the bottom, the medieval monsters are still menacingly below the surface, never really gone. This is the third panel, knowledge. Instead of monsters, though, there's the female-headed snake, the emblem of the search for knowledge, of good and evil and science and art. The Eve figure holds a book and the future, a child in her arms. This was the last piece in the series, but as I began to feel hopeful, when a vaccine was released, I felt the urge to express my gratitude through prayer. I'm so sorry, I thought I turned my phones off. This piece I call Renewing the Works of Creation. I made it to thank Hashem, and I return to the blessing that we recite when we see a natural wonder. The dark rectangles represent headstones for graves, as do the letters in the far right corner. And the Shekhinah is delivering light and hope. This piece I call Lecha Dodi, the song that we sing to welcome the Sabbath bride, inviting a quiet and peaceful time into our lives. It is what I hope the future holds for us. That's the conclusion of the quarantine series. And if we still have enough time, I would like to show you some other works I've done and talk about some of my personal
Yes.
inspiration.
Please go ahead, Karen.
So this piece I call Kaparot, and it is a reference to a ritual in which we hold the bird above our heads at Yom Kippur and ask it to take away our sins before the new year begins. If you look at the woman holding on to the bird, you might think that if she doesn't let go, the bird could also represent her means of escape from her domestic chores that surround her. This piece I call the Red Queen, and it refers to many ideas of female empowerment. The inspiration for this and many of my works come from Proverb 31, a woman of valor, Eshet Chayil. A woman of valor who can find her. Her worth is far beyond rubies. While acknowledging the achievements of the ideal woman, I can't help but hear a subtle subtext. And this is exactly what attracts me to this poem. For example, in verse 15, she rises when it is still night, gives food to her household, and allotted share to her maidens. For me, that sounds mystical and romantic and noble. And also a lot like get up early, make breakfast, pack all the lunches, figure out the afternoon snacks. How many dinners do I need to plan to meet all of everybody's needs? My purpose is not to give a feminist or literary critique of the poem, rather to explain that the language in this proverb and in many prayers and poems in Jewish liturgy urge me to my creative process. And while I want to be the idealized traditional Jewish woman, I do not want to be confined by that definition. And my creative process allows me to express my emotions and gives me a way to find harmony within my conflict. This collage was made in homage to Rosh Chodesh, which is said to be the women's holiday. As the phases of the moon guide the Jewish calendar, so do they connect women to nature through our own lunar cycles. I'm currently re-exploring some three-dimensional works. I use paper to make three-dimensional figures, and I find that the techniques of photo transfer or gel decals or painting and drawing take on a whole new aspect when I apply them to three-dimensional surfaces other than paper. I call this piece, Let Her Deeds Praise Her in the Gates. It's also from A Woman of Valor. It's a box that once held a clock, and I just liked how it looked like it could be her home. This piece, The Sea and the Shore, was completed shortly after my children graduated college and moved to their own homes. It contains memories of their childhood playing at the seaside and the future course that our family ship would take. I am still looking forward. Thank you. So I think I'll stop sharing if I can get my cursor to do that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was so interesting. It was great to hear. It was wonderful to hear all of your inspirations and some of your process. And I applaud you and I thank you for sharing so much of what's behind some of the pieces that we can look at. And it's so interesting to hear about what you think about and all the things that go into the work before you start it, while you're working on it, and probably after you finish it. You think probably constantly of things you could add or tweak or change. So I'll start with that question, which is, after you do complete a piece, like, do you feel it's finished, or are you constantly kind of working on it?
For me, when is it done is like the hardest question, probably for most people who do something creative. Sometimes when I think something's done, I just leave it on the wall for a while I'm working on something else. A lot of times I work on more than one piece at once. And if it's up there long enough and I'm like inspired enough by something else, I put it away. it's not an easy decision to make. There's always something you think, oh, maybe I should have just
Yeah.
done a little extra. Sometimes I just have to literally say to myself, put it away, you're done.
Because things in retrospect have a different look kind of than when you're starting out. And you did start with that idea when you were talking about the omen, and you said, like, what good is an omen if you can only understand it by looking back? And I think that you have really touched on something with that when you speak about how you paid so much attention to this feeling of demons and monsters, omens during this time. And I wonder if you have any other thoughts about these omens after working with them so closely.
COVID wasn't the first time I've thought about that idea of not paying attention to the things that are in front of us. And in my work, I guess I try to bring those things to light. As a person, I'm always trying to step back from the immediacy of things and see the bigger picture. There's something Viktor Frankl wrote once, I think it was Man's Search for Meaning, describing that one way to view our lives is that this is our second chance, and to make decisions, important life decisions, from that perspective, that this is your chance to do it right. So it's part of who I am, looking for those moments, looking for the meaning, not wanting to miss something.
It makes your work very rich.
I'm glad that
Anybody have a
I can
question
share
I'd
that.
like to ask Karen after listening to her? I have some more questions if not. If you have a question, you can just unmute yourself.
I have a question.
Yes, Iris.
Hi, thank you, Karen. This was very, very beautiful. The work, the Red Queen that you did, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you perfectly.
The tape measure fascinated me. I couldn't really figure out what the meaning of that was.
Yeah, so when you, I don't know if I can share it again. Would you like,
Oh,
I can
that'd be
show
great.
you. Is that okay,
Yeah,
Amy?
yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Let me see if I can do that quickly. Here she is.
Yeah.
Let me
Yeah,
do.
I
Yeah, you
kind of-
see her bigger. So if you see them, when I worked on this piece, so the idea, I was thinking about all the things that are considered womanly arts. So I don't know if I can enlarge this more, but I tried to make it as big as I could. You see, she has the needle and thread, the womanly art of sewing in her left hand, and the
Yes.
scissors in her other hand.
Right.
There's the cooking spoon and the
Oh, I
knife.
see. It's part
And
of
if
her
you look
sewing. Oh,
on the
yeah,
right
it's all
side,
around
you
her.
see the hand
Oh,
sewing.
yeah, now I see it now. It's
So the
part of
tape
her
measure was
sewing.
part of that
Right.
idea of what women do and taking measure of things.
Yeah, okay, I got it. And there's a wrench or something?
Oops, sorry. I don't know why my cursor
Uh-huh.
isn't making itself. Okay, there we go. I'm done.
Oh,
And
Sorry
as you
about
said,
that.
the hands are repeatedly of interest in your work. There's
yeah.
many appearances of hands throughout the pieces.
Right. Did that answer your question, Iris?
Anybody else have a question that they'd like to ask her? I noticed I noticed a kind of nod to Judaica, especially with your assemblages or your three-dimensional pieces, that often in Judaica, as we've learned through other shows, that pieces that people may use as ritual objects are often repurposed, and particularly through the diaspora, Jews have had to do that. If they needed a ritual object that they didn't have, they would repurpose another object in order to make use, be able to make that blessing. And I noticed that that's a big kind of theme, maybe by accident, that Karen does. But particularly when she talked about how the woman at the gates piece used to be a clock. And I love the idea of time passing and ticking and all that, particularly with a woman and her life cycle, etc. And also the idea that she had repurposed that and how that kind of has a double entendre with how much of Judaica through history has been created. So that was a special thing. We chose to put that picture of that 3D piece into the virtual exhibition, which of course is all two-dimensional, but we thought it was an interesting work and we wanted to show some of what she does with the assemblages. But in the gallery itself, we are going to have a number of her sculptural pieces in our cases that you could come and see as well. I noticed a double helix in the knowledge piece. And you didn't talk about that, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that I wanted something more rational. You know, how at the top there's the instruments and I just forgot the name of it. The instrument that's used for ships to determine the location, and then there's the indication of the north and south on the compass rose, and then the hourglass. That last piece, I really wanted to remind myself and the viewer that, rational thought, science, learning can be a source of sanity when everything else seems to be going crazy. And that, demons may or may not exist, but we have ways of looking at the world that are scientific and rational.
You mentioned the Black Wedding also, and there were reports, as you said earlier when we were talking, of Black weddings happening in the US during COVID. And of course, they're very controversial because they represent the concept of, unmarriageables being united. And it was a daring piece to create, and a very, very multi-layered, multi-symbolic, as you carefully described each section. There's more even than what you described going on in the piece, but the historic reverberation of the concept of a Black wedding, which many of us may not have heard of, but maybe you could explain to us a little more about what a Black wedding has meant in history.
Well, I think it goes to superstition, this idea, like, who can we sacrifice, or or what can we do? I suppose, our first take, and probably the most honest, is the idea of the sacrifice, that the couple who were, for whatever reason, out of the ordinary, being married in the graveyard, was a sacrifice. But you could also wonder if it wasn't a way to find hope and help two people that maybe couldn't have found a partner or a future, were being given that in this very bizarre way. So I can't pretend to understand. I just find it interesting to think about all the possibilities.
Yeah, it's very
And how much choice they had in the matter, I don't know. Maybe they felt they were doing something noble or valuable. It's, not that common, but definitely happened, and definitely happened at different periods of time of plague or the Spanish flu. It was in the New York Times.
Yeah.
A couple was getting married in the cemetery. I just think I just found the whole idea of it moving and touching, that we would go to something so intimate as marriage to look for a cure or a healing. I mean, they weren't harmed, they were married. Were they forced into it? Maybe, but maybe they wanted to be married, and maybe they thought they were going to do something wonderful, people who otherwise weren't comfortable in society. So
And also the idea of the marriage of dark and light, as you also have in the piece, like just the whole tension that's been part of our lives, you know, and as we spoke about as we were opening tonight, this tension between opening up and also staying close, going back to work, but maybe preferring to be home, or going back to school, but kind of wishing we were home, and all the different feelings that we all go through as we kind of look at the hopefully end of this pandemic time.
Right. The work is also composed purposefully with the one, I don't know if I can just find it for you. With one side is dark and one side is light. And that was conscious. One side here, I'll see if I can share it. One side has the demon holding up the chuppah. And here. And this blue monster holding up the chuppah. You can see my whole thing. Sorry, I'm not going to make it. You're going to see the whole thing because I don't want to lose my Zoom again. We have the light side with the flowers that are growing, the life, hopeful, affirming side. You know, we have the letters, you know, for the symbol of the grave beneath their feet. But there is green under their feet as well. The side being the black. That was my intention for you to think about. Like in the first piece, the Ouroboros, it's the circle of life. Mm-hmm. So as awful as this is, he's also holding up the chuppah for them. So.
And it's an opportunity in some ways for them.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions before I take you on a little tour of the exhibition?
I had a question, just what is an unmarriageable person? I'm sorry if I was confused by what that meant.
That's a very good question. It's something that comes up when you read about Black weddings, and it's why they're controversial, because it sheds light on this concept that at the time there had been the uniting of two people that may or may not have had difficulty functioning in society for whatever reason. Right, Karen? Like maybe they had mental illnesses, maybe they had disabilities. Sometimes a Black wedding is just considered just two strangers who don't know each other. So in that way, they may be unmarriageable just because they don't know each other. But it was just sort of a reference made to the duo that kind of would come forth.
Right. I don't, you know, I read as much as I could about it to educate myself to make the piece, but I can't tell you that I'm an expert. You can Google it. The New York Times had a big article during like April of 2020. Tablet magazine had a huge article about it. And I'm sure they have resources that you can search. You know, it's not something that we practice in a regular way. Superstitious people are doing this, and very rarely. So I don't know that there's a real protocol for who falls into that category. You know, schlemiels. I don't know. Somebody who is, you know, unhappy, alone, uncared for. That's why sometimes I feel like maybe there was something hopeful that people who were alone.
Something magical and mystical about it, which is why it was used to ward off plague. So kind of interesting.
I'm not promoting it.
No.
I think it's an interesting thought to think about as far as, you know, who made the, as you're saying, you know, we don't really know much about it. I never heard of it before this conversation. But just thinking about it from a sexuality perspective, heterosexual versus gay, and who made the decision to marry these people. And that's just something that came into my mind.
All good thoughts. I encourage you to look it up.
There's so much to think about with all its multi-layered collage. There's always something new to look at in her work. So let me show you how to do it. I'm going to share my screen and find the virtual exhibition. I'm going to tell you how to get to it after, so it won't be elusive for you. Okay, so what you can do here is when you enter the exhibition, there are some buttons at the bottom. You see where my cursor is here? And the play button will take you through a timed tour, but the right-hand guide point, you use your mouse and you click on it and it takes you over to the first piece in the exhibition, which shows you the title, Scarlet Wool. And then when you click on it, you'll get a label, which tells you when it was created and the media she used and its size. I should tell you that all of these pieces are for sale, and if anyone is interested in a price list or in finding out more, you can contact me after tonight. And so you move on from piece to piece. This is the Psalm 27 that you talked about with the cocoon, and we talked a little bit more about some of the symbols that are inherent in this piece, the checkerboard here. Again, you click on it and you get the label and the year it was made and the size. You can use your up arrow and your down arrow on your keyboard to zoom in if you want to look closely at a detail on the piece. And then you can resume your tour by going to the right button here, this little arrow pointing to the right, and it'll take you to the next piece. This is our sort of entry point into the gallery, and this is our welcome screen, which gives you some information about Karen. This is kind of a summary of what I read to you as we opened the show. You can come back and read it at your time, at your own leisure. Here's her cocooning piece. Again, you can click on it to get a label. Oh, I have to add some info on that. Note to myself. Okay, and on through the show. You click the right arrow. You can get closer. You go from piece to piece, and it takes you through the exhibition. This is the medieval monsters piece that she mentioned earlier with the two monsters here. Black Wedding, Lecha Dodi, and the show goes on and through around the gallery. There are pieces that are here in the exhibition that are not, that weren't mentioned in the talk, but that appear in the show. So I do urge you to enter and take a look around and have a view of it. Here's two photos, as I mentioned earlier, of some of her sculptural work. So this is the front and the back. Which one is the front, Karen? Is there a front and back, or is it just one side and the other?
I think the one on the left is the front.
Okay, oh, good. I wasn't sure because they both were so interesting, but it shows like a woman's work and sort of the person behind the work and the inspiration for the work being the person, and also the woman's hands hard at work creating. And then you can see more of the gallery and more of her works. This is Serenade, and I happened to ask Karen a little bit about this piece, which she told me was inspired by looking down at a spiral staircase in the Louvre at her mother, or maybe her daughter, or them both together. And that this beautiful, what I saw as a rainbow, maybe you see a spiral staircase, each of us may see something else, came out from that experience that she had. So it's just exciting to see like the work that emerges from her experiences. We go over here. These three pieces represent Shabbat. We can get a little closer. And again, we can use our up arrow and our right arrow once we click on the piece. And Iris and Leslie can tell me what I need to change tomorrow to go through this, guys. But here we are with the label and the size and the idea that this is a diptych that Karen created about Shabbat, which kind of is a wrestling among maybe every woman as she prepares the Shabbat meal or prepares for the holiday, which is so much to do and so much that needs to get done, but also the beauty and the harmony of Shabbat. And this piece on the left, just to me, was just joyful. A challah, candlesticks. Here are some flowers that reminded me of the garden. So then we just continue. Here's a piece that I found particularly inspiring when I first came across Karen, when I first came upon her. This kind of symbolizes a lot of what she talks about the Eshet Chayil, the crowned woman, carrying this Sisyphus-like pomegranate on her back, getting ready for the holidays, and all the beauty inherent in that, and also some of the burden, I guess, right? And that dichotomy that she's always wrestling with. So that's a good symbol of what she's after with that concept. And here's the triptych that she mentioned earlier. Again, you can click on each piece and you can look at the label and zoom in if you really want to get close to something. I like that reference to the American flag and the justice piece. You can close something if it's bothering you to look at, like that. And these little feet represent like as if you were standing in front of the piece, so you can move them around and then click, and that sort of takes you in. Go on to the next section. Get close to each piece. And then I thought this was a good piece to put towards the end of the exhibition, which is renewing the works of creation and the idea of rebirth and renewal, as well as remembering some of what we've lost during the pandemic and during this time, and people we've lost. And so we just have one last stop on the show, which is just a picture of the Assemblage's Woman at the Gates piece that we talked about before. Again, the hands, always the hands in her pieces. And then it just takes you back again to the beginning. So you see at the top, there's this, what's this called? Web address? URL is what it's called. You can copy that and you can share it with whoever you like, and they can come in and see the piece as well. And at the bottom, there's a place to comment underneath the exhibition as well. So I will stop sharing my screen. Copy this link. I'll stop sharing my screen. I'm going to put it here in the chat. So if you guys want to copy it and paste it into your computers, you can, but you can also get to it at www.wjcenter.org, which is the web address at WJC. So does anybody have any questions?
Hi,
Oh, go ahead.
I have one question, just the technical stuff. Is there any paint used, or is it all papers?
I paint the papers. I take paper, like white paper or paper that's been written on or used or brand new paper. I paint it with acrylic paint. I use, sometimes I scribble and draw on the paper first. Sometimes I scribble and draw on the paper afterwards. Sometimes I use resist materials and then paint over.
Okay.
Does that answer you?
Yes, thank you. And any fabric?
Sometimes I use fabric, yes. Yeah. Found objects. The majority of my work is paper, but like even in the assemblage that we just looked at with the house, you know, I made her the skirt. I sewed her skirt for her. And yeah, sometimes I put fabric in, sometimes I paint on fabric and use it as part of the collage. Yeah.
One of the things that I've read about Karen is that there's a lot of layers in her pieces that we don't even see, that she works on and works on and works on, and that part of the process is also part of her kind of celebration of the fact of what we were saying earlier, that we all have different layers inside of us, and that kind of comes out in her work. So one has to resist the interest in peeling it away and seeing what's underneath when they're looking at it. So I'm sure that will come up as the things that we think about when we see collage. So I want to also just do a quick shout out and thank you to the Jewish Art Salon who introduced me to Karen and where I came across her. And if anyone's interested in following them, they do have a really wonderful series of open studio talks that they launched during COVID, which allows you to get exposed to artists doing all kinds of work in different media. So thank you. I will leave you here. I appreciate your support and your joining us tonight. And I hope that if any of you want to be contacted by the gallery or get future invitations from us, you could leave me your emails here in the chat. So if anyone has any last questions or comments, I'll stick around. But thank you.
I'll
And thank
just
you
say
so
thank you,
much, Karen.
Amy.
It's been
Thank
a pleasure
you.
working with you.
Thank you for this opportunity. And you can follow me on Instagram, Karen Kassap. It's easy to do. And
Yes.
also Hopper Prize. If you go on their website, not just me, there are some other wonderful emerging artists that are nice to look at. And just a thought, this isn't just a little click, just a click. But thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to have this opportunity.
And I look forward to installing your piece in the gallery this week. All of your pieces. So thank you so much for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Good luck. Stay healthy.
Thank you, friends and
Good night.
family.
Good night. Thank you. See you tomorrow, Amy.
Thank
and
you.
Karen, and Leslie.
Really great, Karen. Such good, insightful conversation and such wonderful meaning in your work.
There's one of my other children right there, Sam and Rebecca.
Hi.
Thank you for being there. Milesy, I think, left, but thank you, Miles. Thank you, Mindy.
Great talk.
Yes.
Okay.
Bye.
So Amy, I'm hopeful that before the show is down, we're going to be able to have like a Meet the Artist Day. I'm just like,
I know.
I'm thinking positive
Absolutely.
thoughts.
If we can schedule something, I will absolutely promote it. For sure.
I'm there. I'm vaccinated and I'm there.
Yes. This is my mom. Hi, Mom.
Hi.
My
Hi.
mom's name is Norma.
Thank you.
And that's my
Nice to meet
husband.
you.
Glasses.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Yes, it's
Thank
So
you for
nice.
being here.
Very interesting. Really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. I look forward to seeing the next things you do.
Okay, so I'll see you tomorrow, Amy, 11:30-ish.
11:30ish. I'll be there, so don't worry. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be there. Don't
I
worry.
see.
If there's any problems, I'll text you. Okay. I'm afraid if I leave, since I'm a co-host, I don't want to shut this off. So I'm gonna wait for everyone else to leave.
Oh, okay. I don't know what would happen, but
I don't know if
very good
co-host,
question.
but I didn't want to like. leave you
Bye-bye.
here. Bye.
Bye, Mom. Let me see if Yeah, you are still a co-host. Let me see. Withdraw I'm withdrawing the co-host permission. You're
Okay,
no longer a co-host, so you are free to go.
thank you. I'll see you tomorrow, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you.